and something would blow up on the set toolkit, and Dave would go, okay, what is that? Okay, hang on. Da-da-da-da. Okay, do another git pull. And we had 2 patches for the set toolkit while he's teaching the class. And you're watching this guy type, and you're going, this is just surreal. But without further, this is Dave Kennedy, and he was telling me, yeah, I wrote some more code on the plane in, so this could be another one of those events.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you. So I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming out and listening to me talk. It's really a pleasure to be out here. It's Jack and Chris. Hey, every point at Jack and Chris over there. Hey, trying to sneak in back there. I want to say this is my first time in Calgary, and what I expected is, I don't know if you know the custom wars that are going on between the United States and Canada, but normally when you go in, you get like frisked, and it's the vice versa for you folks. So came in here, and everybody was super nice and friendly, wearing cowboy hats, and it was the exact opposite of what I thought it was going to be. So it was pretty amazing. But I want to thank you, everybody. I flew in this morning, literally flew in from Cleveland. It's about a 5-hour trip. And then as soon as I get done speaking here, I'm flying all the way back to Cleveland, Ohio. So a really quick trip, unfortunately. Just a quick intro to myself. I'm one of the founders of DerbyCon. So tickets go on sale at 12 o'clock, but I'll give a hint out. Is this live broadcasted? No. Okay, good. So everybody here gets to see it. I usually release the tickets an hour or 2 early. So if you're on there like around 10, 11 o'clock, it'll definitely probably be open by then. That'll be definitely, what's Sunday? Yeah, May 1st. Yep. At noon. It's supposed to be at noon Eastern time, but we'll see how that goes. whatever that is Eastern time. I'm from. But I'm author of the Social Engineer Toolkit, and I run 2 companies, TrustedSec and Binary Defense, which is really relevant to this talk right here, because when I first got into the industry, I was all about breaking stuff. And breaking stuff was my entire life. And that was, what I knew, and that's all I knew. And, getting out of the military where all I did was break stuff, and getting into consulting, doing the same thing of breaking stuff, I went from that to actually running an organization, running a Fortune 1000 company where, I had a team of about 55 people or so, and trying to run the security program, and now I was on defense. And what I realized was I had no idea what defense really meant. I had no idea really what offense really meant, or really what my purpose was. I was just a consultant that would go in and blow things up, and then I would go and leave. Good example of that is I remember hiring Chris from Lares to come in and break into to Diebold at the time. And they totally destroyed us. And they went and got access to everything that we needed access to. They broke in physically, got into all of our physical access. And so it was a good eye-opener for me. It was actually funny. I think the reason why I started TrustedSec, the main reason why I started TrustedSec, I don't think many people know this, is that Chris broke in and found an Excel document that had everyone's salaries. And so, of course, Chris looks at my salary and he's like, dude, you should go and start your own thing. You can make a lot more money. So I quit like 2 months later afterwards. No, just kidding. Sorry. But thank you, Chris. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. But when I left Diebold, my goal was to start a company in TrustedSec that understands not only offense and defense, but also eventually get to the point to where I'm at Binary Defense, which is both on the defense as well as TrustedSec, the offense. So TrustedSec is a consulting company on the offense, and BDS is a MSSP type company on the defense, looking at what's actually happening out there and those different types of techniques. So I get a lot of different perspectives, and I get to see a lot of things that happen out there. And this is why this talk is so important on the offense and defense. And so what I'm going to do is start a little bit with just a broad statement that if you look at what's happening today and what we're experiencing in this industry, is we're experiencing a very accelerated growth. We have a lot of folks coming into this industry because it is a very hot industry. We have technology all over the place. We have new startups. We have programmers that are, VC funds that are throwing money at this industry to try to make it into something that they want it to be. And it's really interesting to see because we still continue to see breaches. And most organizations don't take the time to look at what those breaches are or how they're actually happening and why they're actually happening. And it's interesting because it's the same stuff that I've been talking about and that Chris has been talking about, that everybody in this industry has been talking about for 10 years. It's the same techniques, it's the same methods, it's the same way that we're breaking into all these organizations, but yet we're still failing at how we actually go and combat these types of threats. And so my talk today is looking at both what we do from an offensive perspective, but really where we need to move from a defense side and understanding one another, because we're no longer in an industry where you can just do defense. We're no longer in an industry where you can just do offense. We have to do both. We have to understand what methods there are out there that these attackers are leveraging and how to ultimately defend against those. I find that when I sit with somebody that is on the defense, I learn so much more. I learn new ways of breaking into stuff. I get better by learning defense. Same thing for offense. If I have some folks sitting with me that are actually on the defense looking at what I'm doing, like, oh, that's how you do that. That's what that means. When I'm over here and doing this, or if I'm sitting with the developer during a red team exercise or a purple team exercise, they learn from those type of endeavors. And so what this, I'm not letting that through. What this talk is really about is looking at that. But what I want to first start off with is when we look at the industry, I remember when I first started, I started off with, hey, what's this risk crap and what's likelihood and probability and impact and all these other things that make up this. I just like to break into stuff and smash things. And what I realized from a defensive perspective is that you have to understand what your highest likelihood and what your highest impact, what your highest risk is going to be within your organization. And that's extremely important because we have a million risks within organizations that we have to defend against on a daily basis. We have millions of vulnerabilities. I'm on a thing called IN's Ask an Expert, where you get phone calls with folks that are asking questions. And the biggest question is, how do I know if my vulnerability management program is working? We have 5 million vulnerabilities. There are criticals and highs and there are mediums and lows, and I don't know how to prioritize those, and I don't know which ones are most important to me. And that's a great question. How do you know if your program is effective when you have 5 million risks that are out there, or vulnerabilities that can equate to a risk? And that's a great question because on the offense, we look at things that we can actively go after during a very specific period of time. On the defense, we have this whole world that we have to deal with called business. We have people that we have to deal with. We have fires that we have to put out. And we have things that we have to do on a regular basis that take us away from being more proactive and even understanding what offense means. And so we did a survey based on a number of breach incidents we have. This is from our incident response teams and Trusted Second Binary Defense. And looking at the analysis of those different types of breaches, 82% came from endpoint compromises originally, which is no shock to anybody out here, right? 82%, a large percentage, our highest probability and our highest risk came from the endpoints. 14% came from perimeter compromises, so the traditional methods of attacking through web applications. Most of the time they become CMSs. Most of the time they're CMSs like WordPress or those types of things that are initial entry vectors into an organization. 4% were mostly password reuses from other sites. A site gets compromised or a third party gets compromised, and that password's the same on the other organization that was typically out there. So we can see here that our two highest probability areas of attack are going to be our employees, which are number one. And that's why, I have a friend that pinged me today, and he's like, hey, do you ever think that you're going to be out of a job because of how secure Windows 10 is? Funny story about Windows 10, okay? When Windows 10 came out, and I go through these phases as a tester, right? I look at like when Server 2008 came out, and they increased RDP's version and used encryption. They spent a lot on security, and I started getting a little nervous. Like, hey, are they starting to figure out how we're doing things, and they're going to start actually stopping us? And what I realized is that every iteration it gets insurmountably more complex about how they're actually doing things, and that increases more and more attack exposures out there. So what was funny with Windows 10, this is a great story, when Windows 10 first got released, it was touting that they had spent like $1 billion on security and all of these other things, right? And so I'm like, oh, well, maybe they're stopping things like SET or things like that, or Metasploit or, other things that I would typically do. So I go and I download a copy of Windows 10, fully patched it up, see what's going on. And I go and I launch SET. And I go and I launch the Java applet attack, and there comes my shell, and everything works just as expected. I didn't have to make any changes or anything else. I'm like, well, maybe they're stopping other things, like, hey, maybe some sort of, PE inspection or dynamic analysis of executables. Nothing like that at all. So, when I look at that, and I say, when you look at the different securities that are happening, while there might be some good security things that are happening in some of these softwares, the humans are always going to be our largest and biggest weakness that we can't fix because it's very much cultural. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to show you a video that I did on CNN a little bit ago where we did a live hack on a company that allowed us to do it. So we got permission from one of our customers to do a social engineering event for them, and it worked out really well. But a funny story about this specific case, when you do social engineering against an individual, especially over the phone, there's some things that you can do and some things that you can't do to get them to do what you want to. Like, for example, in this case, I called the help desk, and if you go to the help desk, you say, hey, I need you to reset, Bob's password. Well, they're going to challenge you for a specific question, right? But if I just say, hey, I can't get to this website and this website's not working, good chance you're not going to get challenged or questioned about your employee ID or who you are or anything like that. So there's certain things that you can do in the confines of that. But a funny story about this one, the producer wanted me to actually hack into her boss's her boss that was traveling basically internationally at the time. And so the boss was in France, and so I did a little bit of reconnaissance on him just ahead of time and saw that he was in Paris. And I spoofed my phone number coming from Chase Fraud Services, saying, "Hey, and I called him up, and I was calling Bob, and I said, "Hey, Bob, just want to see, we're seeing some weird activity. Are you currently traveling in Paris right now?" And what happens when you already know something about somebody is they have a little sense of comfort, right? They're like, "Hey, this is normal, this is okay, this is who this person says they are." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm traveling in Paris. Everything's fine." I'm like, "Okay, well, that's great. Can you confirm a couple things for me first? When are you coming back from Paris?" And Bob's like, "Oh, I'm coming back, this Friday or whatever. So you don't have to worry about any fraudulent transactions." I'm like, "Okay, well, that's great. Well, I just need to go over a couple of transactions for you really quick." And he's like, "Okay, that's great. Well, which ones are they?" And so in this specific type of technique, there's a few type of things that you can do. One is the person's not exactly sure whether or not you're Chase Fraud Services or not, or they might be a little cautious about giving you things like their social security number, which is what she wanted me to get from him, right? And so if I want to get after his social security number, I have to really make him uncomfortable or, without a shadow of a doubt, prove who I am because it's personal to you. And I don't know if you know this or not, but people, like when they're giving up company information, have no problems giving up company information at all. But as soon as you start talking about something that's personal to them, they get pissed, right? Like social security numbers are something that they don't need. And the reason I was able to find out that they were Chase is if you actually go to, you do some research on Turner, their main corporate card is Chase. So I was able to figure out, at least alleviate some of that initial identification there. But so when I made the call to Bob and I started saying this, I'm like, "Hey, Bob, I need you to verify a couple of these things." And I could tell he's in a public area. There's a lot of chatter going around. I can tell that Bob's starting to get a little bit annoyed that he just wants to get this over with, right? And so if I ask him for a social now while he's being annoyed, there's a good chance that I won't get it. So I basically kind of knocked him off his center a little bit. And I said, "Well, yes, did you spend $570? And I named a horrible dungeon porn adult store, in this area. And I started naming off some horrible sites, right? And it caused them to get really uneasy. Like, no, I didn't purchase any of that. I'm like, "Okay, well, Bob, that's fine. It looks like your card got compromised while you're traveling." I'm like, "Can you do me a favor? In order for me to get rid of these, I need you to repeat the names of these stores and the amount so that I can remove them off your card." So he's saying all these horrible names in public, and he's totally uncomfortable. And so then I'm like, "Okay, well, hey, Bob, can you just give me, I need to close a couple things out here. Can you give me your full social so I can close this out in your account?" He's like, "Yeah, here's my social," spits it out. I'm like, "Hey, what's your date of birth?" And then we started laughing, and then, it was all good on that. But this interview is part of this and what we ended up doing for the live social engineer event. Poor Bob.
What do you think of when I say the word hacker? Some creepy dude in a basement? Well, that's a misconception. What if I told you there's a class of hackers who don't just have social skills? They have more social intelligence than anyone you'll ever meet. David Kennedy is one of them. He's what's known as a social engineer, or a people hacker. His craft is to dupe you into doing things and sharing information you probably shouldn't.
Can I just get your credit card number?
Some use it for illegal activity. In David's case, companies pay him to find out if employees are leaving the company vulnerable. He and his team show us how it's done. Step 1, spoof his number so it looks like he's calling from inside the company, and then call tech support.
Hello, you there? Hello?
Hi, this is Ken. How may I help you?
I was wondering if you can take a look at a website I'm trying to get to. It's for a big customer thing I'm working on for Monday, and I can't seem to get to the website from my computer.
Sure. What's the website? I'll see if I can get to it.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate the help. I mean, it could be a stupid thing. I'm really stuck with computers, but so it's www.survey. That's SURVEY -pro.com.
Yeah, I got a prompt to open. I just clicked open, and I'm at the site now.
Here's what the IT guy doesn't realize. By clicking that link, he's just given David full access to his computer.
Whoa, okay, that's weird. I just hit it and it works. It seems like it's working fine now. Awesome. Well, I don't know what you did, man, but I really appreciate the help.
Hey, no problem. That was easy.
That was it?
We're on this computer right now.
You were able to take over this guy's computer within, I would say, like, under 2 minutes.
Under 2 minutes, yeah. Under 2. So that was a fun one. That's how stupid easy it is, right? You just got to think like, hey, I'm in a situation where I'm a bind, and don't do things that come off nervous. One of our guys, Larry, whenever he does social engineering, like we don't let him usually do social engineering much anymore because his face gets beat red and he can't lie. And he comes on the phone, he's like, oh, hey, this is, and he gets all nervous, right? And that's going to cause some flags. But if you sound legitimate and you're not doing anything crazy that's going to cause somebody to trigger an alarm, you're usually pretty fine, especially over the phone. Most people don't expect you to be conning them over the phone, so usually it works really well. I'm going to show you the attack vector that I used in this specific one. And actually, as I was on the airplane flying here, I found that Symantec and Defender are getting a little bit better at PowerShell injection detection. And so the older version of SET got snagged, the PowerShell injection technique got snagged. And so I started debugging on the airplane while I was here, trying to figure out what they're actually flagging on. They're literally looking at static variable names inside of the PowerShell injection. So all I did was rewrite it so that they're dynamic variable names, and it works just fine. So it's so stupid where we're at today, right? It's like, hey, we're going to write a signature off of a variable name, and that's malicious, right? Whatever. So anyways, once I figured that out, it took about 3 minutes to recode, and so I'll show you this right now. If I could set my password right. All right. I don't remember. So this is the latest version of SET. This is 7.1, but I'll push an increment up. It'll be like 7.1.1 or something like that. But with this latest version, what's interesting is kind of how all the attacks have evolved, especially for social engineering. Java was my area of choice because everybody had it. And Java still is okay. I still use Java every so often. I usually fall back either on Java or something else. But what's funny is one of our guys at the office, Justin, was like, hey, he's like, I think we should start using HTAs. I'm like, seriously, HTAs? That's like 1995, cool, right? And he actually found a book that he had, and it was a book that was like cool hacks from like 1999 or something like that. It was like a big, thick book that was like rainbow colored. And he'd open it up, and it said something like, hey, malicious HTAs can be used for compromising systems. And so I started making fun of Justin a little bit. And we go on a social engineer effort, and we use the HTAs as an attack vector. We had a fallback of Java applets. I'm like, there's no way this is ever going to work. We had like a 94% success ratio at that, right? It was like insane. Like we sent it to 3 people, 2 of them, snagged it. So, it was something that was really awesome. So my main method now for doing these are HTA files, because in most cases they don't get snagged by most stuff out there. They're dynamic in nature, and they're not as noisy as something like a Java applet that you would traditionally have out there. And especially if you do things like signing them and things like that, it works out really well. Has a nice prompt that it looks like is actually being signed by the Microsoft Corporation. So it's fantastic. So I use that now as kind of my main method for leveraging it. This new version, by the way, has a whole, if you've done a lot of Microsoft SQL exploitation, has a whole new different module for MS SQL exploitation, and actually use Matthew Graeber's method let me go back a second. So if you go to a system that doesn't have PowerShell, and some folks are actually getting somewhat decent at blocking PowerShell, there's a number of ways of getting files onto a system and executing them. A really cool way is if you take a PE file or executable and you base64 encode it, and then you give it the begin certificate, put the base64 in between, and then you put end certificate, and then you use certutil. It'll actually convert that to a binary for you and execute it, which is fantastic. So there's a lot of different ways, but that's been rewritten into the latest version as well. But I'll go ahead and use the social engineering attacks number 2. I'll do the website attack vector number two, and then I'll use the HTTP attack method number 8. And I'll just clone TrustedSec as an example. And I need my IP address real quick. That's not what I wanted. 127.0. Almost got me. So we use Metasploit from a payload, but it doesn't matter. Anything that's and this technique, by the way, if you're not familiar with what's going to happen, is it's going to do what's called PowerShell injection. And with PowerShell, a lot of this is moving off of traditional viruses are moving off of traditional executables, although still like 90% of them are still executables. But what this is going to do is it's going to take Metasploit shellcode and directly shove it into memory and execute without touching disk. And what's great about it is it circumvents execution restriction policies because you can pass things that are called the encoded command parameters, which is a talk I gave at like DEF CON 13 or 14 or something like that. I did a talk on PowerShell when it originally came out. And so that's an old shell from earlier. But What I'll go ahead and do is I'll go to the website. And when I launch this, it's going to pick up an HTA. Now in Edge, and actually, I don't know if you noticed or not, but Windows 10 actually has both Internet Explorer and Edge on it as well, which I never knew about. So if you actually Google or look for Internet Explorer, it's in there as well. But you can use Edge or Internet Explorer. I don't use Microsoft too much, so I'm not exactly sure which. And once this loads, we go to the website, and it's going to be a website that I clone. Now what's interesting is the way that I'll typically build these into my attacks. I think it's so slow that it didn't load. I can put a time delay in it real quick. There we go. So what's nice about this specific attack, I had a little bit of a short time delay in here, but as soon as it pops up, you can build these into your attacks like, hey, we need to verify your computer, or we need to figure out what's going on with your machine, or anything that you want to. And notice here it's asking for Internet Explorer security, do you want the name Microsoft HTML application host, publisher Microsoft Windows, do you want to open this? Would you open that? Yep. Yeah, absolutely, right? I did, twice. So as soon as you hit allow, it goes in and executes PowerShell on the back end, and it's not inside of a container, so you get full access to the machine once it pops up. So yep, there it goes right there. So a very easy method for compromise and exploitation, especially on the social engineering side. And what's great is, so Windows Defender is actually getting a little bit better. Windows Defender with Windows 10, they exposed a lot of virtualization and sandboxing APIs, and I think they're kind of going the route of like micro-virtualization and a lot of their different ways that they actually look at executables now, and even PowerShell as well. And they're actually exposing a lot of the PowerShell ways of identifying PowerShell injection as it's happening. So there are a lot of ways of detecting these types of things. So they are getting a little bit better and more creative on the ways that they're actively looking for these. But at the same time, you know, every organization that we go to typically still has PowerShell open and everything else. So we'll have that for quite the foreseeable future. And so I'll push that code up like when I'm on the airplane if they have Wi-Fi. So if you look at the data I said from before on the stats, right? 82% endpoint compromises, 14% perimeter compromises. Our highest probability of getting attacked or getting compromised is through our users, right? And in most cases, that is almost always our least area of visibility. I mean, we'll have like something like Symantec or McAfee on there or something like that. Maybe it goes into some sort of SIM, maybe it doesn't, who knows? But in most cases, you know, we don't have the type of visibility we need to actually see what's happening on our endpoints themselves. And so if you look at what we're actually spending our time on, or what we want to spend our time on, or what we should be spending our time on, this is kind of a known entity. This was a study done by E&Y, and they said, you know, the question was, what threats or challenges are the greatest concerns for you? And then the predominant number one, 57% of people said their number one priority was sophisticated attacks targeting at your organization, okay? The second biggest one was phishing, social network exploits, or other forms of social engineering. Okay, so we're concerned about targeted attacks, and we're concerned about phishing or social engineering, right? Those are the two top concerns that we have in this actual industry, which is interesting, right? What we actually spend our time on, majority of it is security vulnerabilities introduced by my own application development, security vulnerabilities introduced through the purchase of off-the-shelf software, and phishing, social network exploits, or other forms of social engineering, typically commoditized phishing schemes that happen to hit your organization, like ransomware now and everything else. And so if you look at that stat, our jobs really deal with putting fires out on a regular basis. It's not necessarily proactive security that we're typically seeing out there. It's really trying to put out fires within an organization and actually understanding what our risks are. Now for me, when we go into organizations, it's always like, hey, you know, Dave, we don't understand what you're doing. It's like magic. It's like mystical that you can actually break into these systems and understand. And in most cases, it's usually like an exploit that was like from like, you know, 2010 or even older, like Apache, right? Tomcat are still out there, JBoss, other things like that. We still find stupid things that really should be patched or should be fixed in early cases. But the defense doesn't really understand or know what exactly is happening out there. And so if you look at that, that's a big issue. We'll talk about that in a second. So in order for us to get better as an industry, it first starts with not focusing as much on the fires, although they're absolutely important. It's more so understanding that you have to focus on the larger picture and actually have a strategy around understanding offense and defense to actually build that. I'm going to show you a little bit of our history of why we're where we're at today, and it's not all our fault. In fact, we're doing a lot of great things. But the truth of the matter is that we require a lot of work right now in most organizations to get to where we need to be to even handle what we're seeing today, let alone what's going to happen tomorrow. If you look at some of the main methods of exploitation, executables by far, 94%-ish of what we see typically out there from infection rates are still binary droppers. That's slowly changing to PowerShell. Bash now is being integrated into Windows, which is fantastic. I love that. I love it. I love it. Love it. Honestly, when I saw that press release, I did a happy dance, and then I celebrated with some bourbon, so it was fantastic. But it's like they're handing us new methods for exploitation, which is, it's great. So understanding the offense today, it couldn't be more important. And I'd like to reference, did anybody read what the write-up from the hacking team, what the guy that the hacking team did, right? What was interesting about that, and I think I made a comment, Chris made a comment, a few of us that actually made the penetration testing execution standard, the guy literally followed the penetration testing execution standard to the T when he destroyed hacking team. Like he went through the reconnaissance and intelligence gathering and threat modeling and looking at what models or what areas he's actually going to go after. His vulnerability analysis phase of actually finding a flaw in the environment. The exploitation phase, that one small hit. He wasn't running scanners anywhere to find things. He exfiltrated data. He moved laterally in the environment to find things. This is how breaches happen. That's how they're happening today. How attackers get access is by going into one system, moving to others, and then moving from system to system until they get access to the data that they need. And I don't like to quote Verizon's data breach report so much. There's a lot of ambiguity to a lot of it. But one thing that was really interesting that I found from that report is that if you look at the time it took to actually compromise an organization, it was usually minutes. The time to actually exfiltrate data was days. So it took an attacker a couple minutes to get in. Then it took an attacker a couple days to find the type of data they needed and then exfiltrate that out of the company. So you literally have days to figure this out, to actually find a breach before it actually happens. Doesn't mean you have to find it the second it happens. And to be honest with you, one machine becoming compromised is relatively irrelevant to your entire organization's security posture if you can catch it as it's happening. But it's a very small window of what we're actually seeing out there. And so if you look at foundational principles of that, the types of techniques haven't changed from 10 years ago. It's the same method. What's interesting is the word sophisticated in hackers, the sophisticated hackers. That term is literally what we've been doing for 10, 20, 30 years about compromising an organization. It just means that you're targeted by somebody that knows how to run an exploit or buy an exploit kit or something like that. Now you're in a sophisticated realm. If you can code Bash, you're now a sophisticated actor in this industry. And that's a big excuse. For me, the product industry, and this is just my personal belief, the product industry has set us back 10 years in security because we are now reliant off of that. And I'm going to show you a little bit of history around where we came from in INFOSEC. And this is my opinion of where we came from in this industry. You look at the 90s, and you had basics. Hey, we need to architect our network because we didn't have things like firewalls, and maybe they were just starting to come out. And hey, we need to do network segmentation. We need to split off these people. Sales folks, from a technology perspective, shouldn't need to talk to these folks, and we shouldn't talk to these folks. And so we did a lot of basics. What the hell was that? Sounded like someone was ripping one. Anyways, so we had all these basic principles that we built kind of what we thought would be a good way of being able to stop what we saw at that time. But no one listened. And so we tried to at least slow it down a little bit and say, well, hey, we need to stop what you're doing here. We need to inspect what you're doing so that we can make sure that it's secure. And so then INFOSEC really became, hey, we're the ones that stopped the organization from being able to implement IT. And so then we were just known as the ones that cry wolf, right? We're like, hey, they're always saying it's going to be bad, but we haven't seen it. They're not bad. And then we got PCI, and PCI was like a godsend for the security industry because we're like, hey, don't comply to PCI. You're not going to be able to use credit cards, and hackers are going to break and steal your credit cards, right? So again, we were the folks that were crying wolf, right? We're out there saying, hey, PCI is what we have to adhere to. We have to do PCI, PCI, PCI. Well, then the awesome thing of Target happened, right? And see what I did there? Yeah. But then it was let's not be the next Target. We heard that play for the next few years. And so again, we're crying wolf, right? And then one awesome magical thing happened, right? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. A whole bunch of people got nailed, right? And everybody started freaking out. Every business, because it kind of started with Target a little bit. The CEO got let go, and all these other folks, and our board of directors now are getting super concerned with cybersecurity, and now cyber, and all this other stuff, and China and all this great stuff, right? And then the INFOSEC market went crazy. People were literally scared at what was going on in this industry. They're like, "What? We have all of these cyber weapons? that can literally take down our entire company and shut us down. We have sophisticated attackers that wear hoodies in basements that can literally wipe us clean, right? And then we started getting things like words like APTs and sophisticated actors and hackers everywhere. And so it gave organizations a way to say, well, we're not at fault here because it was sophisticated. When literally they had NetBIOS exposed on the internet, right? Not our fault. Not our fault. And then something awesome happened in the security industry. Something amazing, right? We got funding. We got cash. And hey, I don't know what you need, but tell me what you need for money, and I will go and I will give it to you for your budget, right? So our budget skyrocketed. Now we had money to go do everything that we've said that we were going to do in the past. Hey, finally I can implement my security program now because I have money, right? Finally I can go and I can do all the stuff that I've been promising you that I can do and that I've been crying that we can't do because I didn't have money, and we got our wish. And then with all this money came the products. Right? Well, you guys got money. We got a product that could fix this. Right? And so here you are at your desk, overloaded, don't have enough people, trying to find people, right? Hey, I need to hire, I got 15 people I need to hire now, and I can't find talent. But I got all this cash. And so now you have the product era. And what happened is we spent 10 years of neglect, and now we're supposed to turn and protect the company overnight, and that does not happen. You can't fix years and years and years of neglect in a day or a year or 5 years. It takes time. And unfortunately, it takes time because it requires re-engineering how your business does work. And fortunately or unfortunately, the way that a business does work requires technology. And with technology comes a cost, and that cost is security. Interesting enough, I've always been against security reporting through IT. Right? It's always been the biggest debate for us, is that security needs a bigger venue, needs to report to the CFO or some risk-oriented organization. I agree with that. In some companies that works. I just met with an organization, very big, multi-billion-dollar organization, where security reports through IT, but security controls 100% of the budget. The entire IT budget. All budget goes through security. So if there's a new IT initiative, it goes through security. I have never seen that before. That is amazing. So if you have a new IT project, one, it's got to go through our process of security. Two, it's got to have enough funding to incorporate security into it. And three, we might or might not approve it based on the risk that it has to the organization. That is amazing. I almost dropped out of my pants. I dropped out of my seat there. I'm like, are you serious? That's what happened? Good friend of mine. I can't believe he pulled it off. That was awesome. I don't know how he pulled it off, but it's great.
How big of a company? What sector?
So they're around anywhere between 5 to 16 billion. I'll put it in there, and manufacturing. Manufacturing. Out of all the industries, they're the worst, right? Yeah. Yeah. Not financial. Financial is usually under the risk, umbrella. But anyways, back to this. The technology era was born. And what we did is we tried to say, okay, well, we don't have enough people. We don't have enough stuff, but we got all this cash. So we're going to focus on implementing technology that can hopefully stop us. And that's when you saw technology over talent. And what was interesting with that is that this industry now is all about negativity. It's about how hackers are infiltrating our organizations and stealing all of our money. And without the technology to protect us, there's no way for us to do it. We have artificial intelligence now that stops 99.9% of the hackers. I almost crapped my pants when I saw that at an airport. That's what we're selling people. You're going to stop 99.9% of the hackers? Really? I don't even know notice your product is there when I'm hacking it. I'm like, oh, you have this product? Oh, yeah, it was really hard to get around. I just used the same stuff that I use every other day. Okay, anyways, but it feels like we suck because all of these vendors are telling us that we suck. It feels like we suck because this whole product era is all about the negativity. If you don't buy our next generation product, if you don't buy it, it gets around it. And so if you look at that as kind of the key concepts of where we're at today, the technology does not fix it. In fact, a good analogy is we moved to the next generation firewalls, right? And I love going into companies with next-gen firewalls because they're like, hey, we have a next-gen firewall, and it's awesome. It stops all these things, right? I'm like, well, what does it stop? Oh, we don't know, but it stops stuff, right? Because it's next-gen. What I love is like, hey, we got all the... I'm going to go back to the cache one because I can just keep going to cache all day long, right? So you have 10 years of an ASA that's been sitting there, or multiple ASAs that I'm sitting there, right? And you have all of your people that are trained on ASAs, but you have 10 years of bad practices, right? Like, oh, hey, we have this firewall hole here, and we allow these ports out for this business justification and all this other stuff. And instead of doing the hard work, which is re-architecting your network, you buy a next-gen firewall because it's going to give you this next-generation capabilities, right? And so you have this appliance, and then you take the Cisco importer tool, and you import that into your Palo Alto. And now you have next generation, right? Doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. And so if you look at what we're facing now, it's that we have a reliance off of technology versus the people. And that there's no way this industry will be successful when that is the case. We will always figure out ways around the technology. We will always figure out ways around that. But the people are the tricky ones. When I get busted in an organization doing a red team exercise, it's the people that catch me. They had something crazy that I hadn't seen before that snags me in some way that I didn't think about it. And those are the types of folks that you want on your team. So I'm going to show you a new version of Unicorn since I just released it. But if you're interested, you can get this from my GitHub site. One second. Here we go. Has anybody played with Unicorn before? Magic Unicorn? Couple? Thank you. Early adopter. What's funny is I was in the middle, this is another good story class, but I was in the middle of training at Black Hat, and I'm like, you can't be called a hacker unless you have a command line tool that has ASCII art, okay? And it's just a rule. Like, you're not a hacker until you do that, right? And so the one guy's like, well, that's not really a good tool because it doesn't have, like red eyes, like it's an angry unicorn. And so like right in the middle of class, I coded the red eyes and pushed a new get request out. So it has red eyes now. Real important. But what Unicorn does is it's the PowerShell injection technique that I talked about before. And this latest version adds a lot of obfuscation that was recently added to get around all the other ones out there. What's great about this is it doesn't touch disk. So you literally can copy and paste the command line argument that's PowerShell into an environment, and it will execute code and compromise the machine. What's nice about that is anywhere that you have remote command injection, it works perfectly fine, right? So if you're going through like SQL injection and you find the XP command shell store procedure, you can drop that into there and it works perfectly great. So anywhere that you have command injection, you don't have to upload a binary, you don't have to do any of that other stuff. You can upload anything you want to into this. It also supports creating the HTA files that you saw earlier, so it'll create an HTA file for you. One of the greatest ones too is it'll do macro injection as well. So when you enable macros, it doesn't actually drop a VB script or anything like that in the machine. It actually executes the PowerShell code as well and compromises the machine. So it'll build the macro for you as well. But let's go ahead and use this real quick. So I'm just going to specify the payload and then my IP address again. I can remember. Actually, I think I pasted it. We'll see. Yep, cool. And we're going to generate the payload, the IP address to connect back on, and it'll automatically take everything out for me. Now, what's nice about this is that it creates a RC file for you automatically. And so what I can do is launch Metasploit with a listener. So just give it the RC file, and it'll load for you. And then now I need to get my code. And we get our command here. And all you need to do, again, anywhere that you have remote command execution, UAC is fun. You can put that in anywhere, right? And that's just a PowerShell command, and it's base 64 encoded. It's kind of hard to see with the resolution. Let's see if I can blow this up a little bit. Can't believe they don't have. Yeah, I'm not going to even bother with it, but it just says PowerShell hidden Windows encoded. and do -ENC for short. Now, what's interesting is a lot of folks build things off of tools that are very predictable. So, like, for example, I know a lot of folks that try to trigger on things like PowerShell Empire or Unicorn or things like that. If you change these values around, so instead of it being -W window -hidden, you can switch those values around. Usually it escapes a lot of the evasion techniques out there just by switching those around a little bit, which is pretty silly. But you execute that, it executes in the background, and then you get your shell. So we got our shell right there. So again, anywhere they hear remote command execution, it works really well. And the latest version compacts everything to a much smaller command line argument. So you can fit the larger payloads like reverse HTTPS, even with stage 2, it'll also fit in there as well. So it's stageless mid-server shell. So it works out really well on both fronts. Big fan. And so, talking about the term purple team, it's a term that really kind of has been around for a long time, but a lot of folks are actually, I think, coming around to it now. I think Chris is talking, probably one of the first people talked about it originally, but the term purple team is something that works effectively on both sides, and it's something that usually involves a third party coming in to do your traditional yearly pen tests, and then after that, you kind of get some results back from your team, and it's back and forth, going back and forth. What we're seeing now is that the evolution now of what we call purple team is more so either building it in-house to your organization or having folks that work with you on an ongoing basis to actively go and do it. And what's interesting about longer-term engagements is you get better over time. It can't just be an annual assessment that you do anymore that focuses on a specific short-term engagement going after things. It has to be something that's ongoing, that tests your defense, that you get better at, that you get better at the detection capabilities. Because things are changing all the time. Ways that we do things change all the time. And those are the types of things that you really need to focus on. I'll show you a couple ways on the defensive side that really make it difficult for us, but those are going to change in a month. Those are going to change in 2 months. Those are going to change in 6 months. Is your team effectively testing those over a larger period of time to say, well, hey, HTAs are now in use for ransomware, and that's what we need to do to stop those? I mean, do you have those capabilities internally to understand those types of techniques? And so if you look at penetration testing has always been a point in time. And it does provide value. But it does not provide value when you're trying to get better at defenses. A penetration test for us is like literally going in, blowing up, showing how awesome we are at breaking into things, and then kind of leaving that there, right? And then the team goes and fixes it, and then next year you do the same thing, and the blue team's like, oh man, these folks are awesome, they can break into anything that they want to. That's not how it should be. We have to focus more on the longer term type techniques that we have. So where do we go from here? We're no longer in a position in this industry where defense cannot understand offense or offense cannot understand defense. We have to be both. So that means that when you're on the blue team, and let's just say you're focused on vulnerability management, you need to understand exploitation techniques. You need to understand how to actively go and attack things. You need to keep up to things. You need to go to DEF CON. You need to go to Black Hat. You need to go to, hopefully, DerbyCon. Yay. But you need to understand what we're doing. And we need to understand what you're doing. You know what I love is going to a defensive talk. I love going to defensive talks. I'm like, hey, here's what we did in our environment that made us a lot better at what we do. I love hearing those talks. I love understanding the rationale, the thought pattern behind doing things. A good person to follow is Ben 10. He works for us at TrustedSec. Ben started off as an IT admin, and he really took hold to defense, but he did that by understanding offense first. And so he's much better at defense than I am at defense, but he understands the offense much better. And he created what's called the POSH-SEC framework. It's a PowerShell way of being able to look for things intelligibly in your environment. He's phenomenal at that. But it should no longer be something mystical that we do. It's no longer something that, hey, we have this tool, this technique. Those are all things that we can actively go and learn. Some quick tips, things that really jack us up on pen tests. Randomize or disable admins. That's kind of an easy one to go through, but you shouldn't have the same password on every single machine. What's best is domain admins. Why does a domain admin ever need to log into a member server? It never does, ever. There should never be an opportunity where a domain admin is ever logged into a member server, period. Remove excessive account permissions. Vulnerability management, most of the ways that we get in still to this day are stupid things like Apache or Tomcat or JBoss or whatever we're seeing out there. They're things that are basic that you'd pick up by a basic vulnerability scanner. We don't need to do some crazy elite stuff to get into your organization. Stopping basic binaries and file types. Do you ever need an HTA file to execute? Ever? No, right? Unless you're using some crazy, horrible application that you need to get rid of in the first place. Again, that Rainbow book from the 1990s, and we're still dealing with that today as one of our most successful attack vectors. So stop simple file types. HTAs, PowerShell is a great example. You should never execute or download PowerShell from the internet unless you have specific exceptions. Stop basic binaries. Most infections occur in either the downloads or the temp directories of the users, the initial ones. You can stop those. AppLocker works like that. It's free. You have it like right now in group policy. You don't need like Bit9 or anything like that at this moment, right? That's another thing too. Well, I'll get into that in a second. But you don't need a lot of that. Did you know within PowerShell, if you're actually doing decent user rights management, like you don't have local admins that are running on all your computers, in PowerShell you can disallow PowerShell execution to normal users. That's an app locker feature. So you can say, hey, no users are allowed to use PowerShell, period, unless you're an administrator. You're part of the administrators group. Do that today. Great way. Getting more visibility into the endpoints. This is a tough one. I'm a big fan of getting more visibility into your environment, but the problem is we have too much information going to our environments. Like SIMs, for example, were a great idea and concept because, hey, we're now getting all the visibility that we possibly need into the environment, but no one knows what the hell to do with that data. So now you just use like the default use cases and like, hey, we have logarithm. It has like 14 use cases that we can use. So let's go ahead and like click those and hit enable, and now we got a SIM, right? Or hey, we're feeding in Symantec. If it triggers on an antivirus alert, we're going to like send an alarm that we're going to go investigate, then do our incident response practices, right? That's what SIMs have become. It's an overload of data. And so unless you understand what you're looking for, you don't have the ability to actively look at what's actually happening on the endpoints themselves. So before you even do endpoints, I'd recommend understand what that is in the first place and what you really need to be looking for. There's some great logs that you can, again, I think I list, maybe not. But there are some great logs that you can pull from your endpoints. You don't need everything. Logon types are very important. Did you know if you do a logon type 3 and the service name that's calling it is NTLM SSP, allows you to detect past the hash in your environment? Yeah. Logon type 3 is remote, right? The service that gets called is NTLM SSP. Doesn't trigger unless you're actually using something like that. I know Nessus will trigger it every so often when they're doing it, but you can put exceptions in for that as a false positive. In most cases, you're not going to see that in your environment. Another good rule, source IP address the same with multiple failed NTLM SSP logins. That's baller, right? That's like, hey, someone's trying to use a hash across your entire environment, and it's jacked up. PowerShell commands. Microsoft now has the ability to take PowerShell commands and pipe those out to event logs. So the actual command that was run, the PowerShell-ENC, actually gets piped to your event logs. If anybody's using -encoded command in your environment, that's probably not a good thing, right? Or like, hey, invoke something, right? Like IEX, load it, download and directly execute in memory. Probably not a good thing in your environment. Don't recommend actively using that. Removing execution restriction policies. There could be legitimate purposes for that. In fact, funny story, the last service pack for Exchange 2016 wasn't signed. And so what the installer would actually do is disable execution restriction policies, install stuff, and never re-enable it. So awesome, right? Amazing. And everybody's worried about Windows 10 getting more secure. It's great. But those types of things you can find right now. They're in event logs right now for you to actually go and identify, and you can just pull those. And I'll talk a little about that and how you can actually do that with Python. There's some great stuff you can do in Python. One of the biggest GPOs that jacks me up, especially if I'm trying to go in from a user compromise and then move laterally in different environments, is this one. This one messes me up every single time. So taking the deny access to this computer from the network, remove the administrators group. Remove the local administrators group. What does that do? Does not allow me to do things like PSExec, like pass the hash, or WMI injection. It completely removes my ability to go and do that. So you have your normal user accounts that are normal users. You have your server administrators, and then you have your workstation administrators, like your help desk folks, right? That's all part of your domain. So you don't need to have a local administrator group ever log into your machine ever in the history of ever. So remove that. Now if I compromise one machine and escalate my permissions, and I grab the local admin hash, or I figure out a way to move from one system to the other, I don't have that ability to use those local admin rights. In order for me to use something like PSExec or WMI commands, I need access to the C share, the admin shares. Ways that I need permissions to actually go and exploit from. So these are things that I heavily remember and that I heavily like. So messing with red team, this is one of my favorites too. So one of the things what I do when I compromise a system is I look for tokens that are available on the machine, either Kerberos tokens or clear text passwords in memory, like through WDigest, Windows WDigest, Mimikatz, right? Are we familiar with Mimikatz? We all love Mimikatz, right? Yay. Well, most of us do from the offensive, right? But what's interesting is with Windows 8.1 and with everything Windows 8.1 and above, they disable the clear text passwords in memory with WDigest. But what's great is there's a registry entry that you can add that the next time a person logs in, it'll automatically store that again back in memory for you real time. So what you can do, and I do this all the time, which is probably, I don't know, maybe good or not, but I'll add the registry key, and then I'll log somebody off, and then as soon as they pop back on again, I get their credentials, which is fantastic, right? But what you can also do is this command right here. If you see subprocess.p open, that's just a Python command to run a command line. That command line right there, echo, and that echo next to it is a password, okay? It's just randomize the password whatever you want it to be. And then you pipe it and just do run as user, whatever your domain is, and make it look like a sexy account. What I heavily recommend is you make that domain, you make that account in your domain, make it a domain admin, make it a crazy ass password. You know, like a 50-character password if you want to, and store it in a safe and never use it. Password never expires. And as soon as you see an invalid attempt on that specific password, you know you've been compromised. 100% know that you've been compromised. That should never trigger a false positive, ever. And what that does is it uses the net-only command. It doesn't actually actively go out to the domain to authenticate. It opens a shell, a command prompt. You can have it be Notepad or whatever you want to. It doesn't have to be command.exe. What you do is just have a scheduled task run in your group policy infrastructure that deploys that out. So run a scheduled task, and it runs that through your entire environment. And anything that I compromise has that username and password sitting in clear text and memory for me. And as an attacker, if I see a domain admin, especially if it's a legit domain admin in your domain, I'm going after that in 2 seconds. I'm going to try to authenticate to another system. And as soon as you get that invalid username and password logon type, especially from login type 3, remote, you know that something's wrong in your environment. I love that one. There's also what we call intrinsic and extrinsic WMI events. There's some great modules and libraries inside of Python, but you don't need Python to do it. But with intrinsic and extrinsic WMI events, you can actually pull and query some really awesome pieces of information from your machines locally as well as within group policy. This one specifically will pull if a new user has been added, like an administrator or domain administrator or whatever that. And I'll publish all this code after this. I wrote it on the airplane when I was coming here. I'll publish all this on the website here shortly. But these types of things with intrinsic and extrinsic WMI events, you can subscribe to certain events or certain classes. You can get alarms or alerts pushed to you through that. And they can be very specific. It's basically, WMI is basically SQL for your operating system. It's phenomenal. It's one of the most powerful things that you can leverage as a defensive person to look for things. Now, a couple of things of warnings that I've learned using WMI is you don't want to, there's a specific thing you can query for WMI. It's called Windows startup commands, or startup locations, sorry. It's Windows startup locations. And what that does is it queries all the startup locations. What you can do is you can build a baseline and say, okay, well, here's my accepted startup locations, and here's the accepted registry values, so that someone decides to load something like persistence in there, I'm not going to allow it. Well, if you have that, if you do that on runtime, it actually locks the registry and the nt-user.dat and it recreates the whole profile for the user. It really sucks. So don't use that for logons. But aside from that, it's very stable. It's something that you can easily use. One thing I will say is that in this industry, it's very easy to say a lot of negatives. It's very easy to say that we're all terrible and that we all suck and that the industry is going down, or that we're failing as an industry. We're not. We're doing a lot better. We're learning from one another, and we're doing a lot better than we did 10 years ago. The problem is that this industry is being taken over by products. Products that are saying that they can do things that they cannot. Products that are saying that they can stop hackers when they cannot. I have yet to find one. I don't know if anybody else has found one that magically stops hackers. I don't know if that happens. So anybody got one that magically stops hackers? So I got 7 minutes. I want to show you. We hit Spybot. I want to show you. We actually developed a tool that stops 100% of the attackers. I want to show this to you real quick. So I got time. I got 7 minutes. So it's well worth it. That's exactly what it is, by the way, actually. Is it? So give me 1 second. Let me find it. It's on Trusted Sec TV. We do stupid stuff. Right here. You want to stop 100% of the hackers, we got you. Here at INFOSEC, we have created the #1 product out there that you must have right now. We call it the hacker vaccine. This technology has been in development for the past 2 weeks. And it's something that we've developed that we know will completely change the industry for the better. Something that not only guarantees 100% full coverage of stopping all the hackers in their tracks. We didn't think 99% was good enough, so we went full 100% coverage on all hacking attempts, and we'll completely shut down the hackers right in their footsteps. We're so excited here that we are having a release party here next week just to be able to celebrate the release of this new piece of technology that we believe is revolutionary and is going to change the whole market for the next. So people ask, how does the hacker vaccine work? How can you stop 100% of the attackers out there? And that's a good question. You know, when we were sitting there trying to figure out exactly how to stop hackers in their tracks, we knew that the only way possible was to develop sophisticated artificial intelligence that goes through your entire network and completely shuts down all of the computers in your environment so that people can't use their computers for hackers to break into it. This revolutionary concept, which is now patent pending, completely shut down all of your environments, all of your users so they can no longer work. Download those pesky viruses, and there you go. There's the problem. It's now fixed.
I used to be afraid that my computer would be hacked into, but I no longer need to worry because it's turned off. Thanks, INFOSEC.
With our latest version 1.0.1, we're going to be releasing a new module called the Enforcer. What's great about the Enforcer is that not only does it track the attackers where they came from, we use sophisticated techniques called ping in order to locate exactly where the hackers are coming from, and then we deploy antigens in order to actually go and stop the hackers with what they're doing. It's a random long shot of Paul driving.
It's enforcing time.
Our Enforcer module literally sends somebody to somebody's house, beats them up, and make sure that they don't ever hack you again. This is our guarantee 100% that they will never touch your computer systems, regardless of where they're at. I don't know. No! So I'll close up with, we all need to be purple. We all need to understand one another. And there's a couple, there's a book that I really like out there. I really recommend. It's called Originals. And it's by a professor out of Wharton that talks about people that were able to change their industries and go in a completely different direction. And it talks a little bit about Steve Jobs and all of his failures that he had, and a lot of the other folks that are out there. Elon Musk is a good example of that. But ultimately, what did they do to change the pattern behavior? Like, for example, SpaceX was a completely different market than it is today. You know, using off-the-shelf commercial products to actually build a rocket ship that can land itself. The way that you change this industry is by working together, being positive, but also knowing that it's going to take a lot of hard work. And that comes with having to learn what we're doing and how the attackers are working. And that I learn every day new techniques. I learn, every single day new techniques to defend, and both on the offensive side. We have to get better at understanding each other, or else this industry isn't going to be successful. So I want to open up to any questions or anything else that anybody has. I'd be happy to answer that, or if not, I'll take off. Anybody have any questions?
Derby and 2 hotels this year?
Oh, it's Derby and 2 hotels. Derby is not in 2 hotels this year. It is at the Hyatt. We decided against it. So yeah, we decided against moving and splitting it up. We thought that would kind of hinder from the conference, but we're staying at the Hyatt this year. We're staying at the Hyatt next year, and that's whatever is beyond there. So it's going to be the same place each time. So.
How many attendees at Derby this year?
Same as last year. We're cutting. DerbyCon 3 we had 2,600 people, and it was too much. So DerbyCon 4 and 5 we cut it back to 2,000. And that seemed to be okay. Still a little packed, especially in some of the rooms, some of the good talks, but at least everybody was able to get into most of the rooms that they needed to. We'll keep it at that. 2,000 is kind of our cutoff at that. So. All right, well, thanks so much for having me out here. I appreciate it.